Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. Amara Cole never expected her routine Saturday morning to unfold into a life-altering experience. Known for her tech empire, philanthropic endeavors, and unparalleled brilliance, she was the epitome of success. But fame had never been her goal. Amara was a woman who preferred making a difference behind the scenes, rather than basking in the limelight. Her anonymity had always been her shield, a way to stay connected to the world without being consumed by it. That morning, she awoke in her modest, but tastefully decorated mansion on the outskirts of Palo Alto. Her mornings typically began with a brief meditation session, followed by a light breakfast of fruit and herbal tea. But today, she felt a rare sense of restlessness. For years, her assistants handled her errands, her chefs prepared her meals, and her security team ensured her safety. Yet something within her yearned for simplicity, a chance to reconnect with the ordinary. She decided to head to a local supermarket herself. Wearing a tailored gray pantsuit and minimalist sneakers, she exuded an aura of quiet confidence. Her choice of transportation, a nondescript, older model sedan borrowed from her assistant, was intentional. She wanted to blend in, to be another face in the crowd. The supermarket she chose wasn't one of the upscale stores she usually frequented, but a modest local market she had passed countless times. The air was filled with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and the soft hum of conversations. For Amara, stepping into the store felt like stepping into a different world, one where her name and status held no weight. Pushing a shopping cart down the aisles, she was struck by the simplicity of the scene. A young mother struggled to keep her toddler seated in the cart while choosing vegetables. An elderly man squinted at the labels of soup cans, muttering about sodium content. Teenagers laughed and playfully debated over which snacks to buy. Amara found herself smiling at the unfiltered humanity around her. She picked up a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a box of oatmeal, items she hadn't personally selected in years. There was a quiet joy in scanning shelves and comparing brands, in the tactile experience of selecting her own groceries. As she moved to the next aisle, a middle-aged woman accidentally bumped into her cart and apologized profusely. "It's quite all right," Amara said warmly, her tone as sincere as her words. For the first time in a long while, she felt invisible in the best possible way, just another shopper in the crowd. She continued browsing, her cart gradually filling with fresh produce, snacks, and a small bottle of imported olive oil that caught her eye. Amara rarely thought about the cost of items, her wealth afforded her the luxury of never needing to. But she was careful by nature and chose the smallest bottle, reasoning it was more than enough for her needs. The day felt almost perfect until it didn't. As she approached the self-checkout kiosks, she noticed a line forming. People were impatiently shifting their weight from one foot to the other, their faces a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion. When it was finally her turn, she meticulously scanned her items, enjoying the rare autonomy of the task. But just as she placed the olive oil into the bag, a piercing alarm shattered the hum of the store. Amara froze, her heart skipping a beat. The shrill sound cut through the air, halting conversations and turning heads. A store employee, a young man with a name tag reading Evan, rushed over with a furrowed brow. "Ma'am, please step aside," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Confused, Amara complied, stepping away from the kiosk as Evan inspected the screen. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm yet tinged with confusion. "It seems this bottle of olive oil wasn't scanned," Evan replied, holding up the small glass container. It triggered the theft alarm. Amara's brows knit together. "I'm certain I scanned it," she said, her voice steady but resolute. "Perhaps there was a glitch?" Evan hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. Before he could respond, another employee arrived, followed closely by a uniformed security guard. The guard, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, immediately took charge. "Ma'am, we take theft very seriously here," he said brusquely. "I'll need to escort you to the manager's office." Amara blinked, stunned by the sudden escalation. "This must be a misunderstanding," she said. "I have no reason to steal." Save it for the manager, the guard interrupted, his tone dismissive. He gestured for her to follow him. The attention of the store shifted entirely to her. Shoppers whispered amongst themselves, their eyes darting between Amara and the security guard. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their assumptions about her character. Reluctantly, she followed the guard through the store, her cheeks burning with humiliation. The quiet dignity she had carried all morning felt stripped away, replaced by a sense of vulnerability she hadn't experienced in years. As she walked, a thought struck her. For the first time in her life, her wealth and influence couldn't shield her from the biases of others. She was just another person accused of a petty crime, her true identity obscured by the perception of her actions. And so, what had begun as a simple errand transformed into a moment of reckoning, one that would set the stage for a series of events neither Amara nor the world could have foreseen. Amara followed the security guard with a composed exterior, though her mind was swirling with disbelief. The murmurs of shoppers followed her like a shadow, and the humiliating reality of the situation began to sink in. She, Amara Cole, a billionaire and philanthropist who had dedicated her life to improving others' lives, was being escorted through a supermarket like a common thief. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh, if it weren't so painfully real. The guard led her to a cramped office in the back of the store, where a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and coffee cups. His name tag read Gerald, manager. Gerald glanced up, clearly irritated by the interruption. The security guard handed over the small bottle of olive oil like it was evidence in a high-stakes criminal case. Caught her trying to steal this, the guard said bluntly, his tone laced with disdain. Amara raised her eyebrows but remained silent, determined to let the facts speak for themselves. Gerald picked up the bottle and examined it as if searching for something that wasn't there. "Ma'am," he said, finally looking at her, "we take theft very seriously here. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Amara inhaled deeply, her calm exterior unshaken. "There's been a mistake," she said evenly. "I scanned that item. If the system didn't register it, then it's a technical issue. I can pay for it now if you'd like." Gerald leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You scanned it, huh? Do you have proof of that?" Amara blinked. "Proof? No, I didn't think to record myself using the self-checkout." The guard snorted, and Gerald smirked. "Well, without proof, it's your word against the system. And our policy is clear, any attempted theft is reported to the authorities." This time, Amara couldn't mask her incredulity. "You're going to call the police over an $11 bottle of olive oil?" "It's not about the price," Gerald replied, leaning forward. "It's about principle. We can't let people think they can get away with stealing, no matter how small the item." Amara opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself. She realized that arguing further would only escalate the situation. She looked at Gerald, then the guard, and then back at the olive oil sitting on the desk. It was absurd, comically so, but the way they looked at her, with suspicion and disdain, reminded her of something deeper, something systemic. This wasn't just about olive oil, it was about judgment, assumptions, and the little power plays that reinforced them. "Fine," she said quietly, her tone measured. "Do what you have to do." Gerald seemed taken aback by her composure but quickly recovered. "Very well. Security, call the police." The guard picked up the phone, and Amara watched him dial with a strange sense of detachment. She could have revealed her identity, could have ended this entire ordeal with a single phone call to her lawyer or a casual mention of her name. But she didn't. Something told her that this moment, humiliating as it was, needed to play out. The police arrived within minutes, 2 officers, both young, both visibly annoyed to be dealing with what they likely deemed a trivial matter. Amara noticed the shift in Gerald's demeanor as they entered. He straightened his posture and spoke with exaggerated authority, as if trying to validate his decision to involve them. "This woman attempted to steal this bottle of olive oil," he announced, gesturing to Amara like she was a dangerous criminal. One of the officers, a stocky man with a weary expression, looked at Amara and then at the bottle. Ma'am, is this true? Amara met his gaze steadily. No, it's not. I scanned the item. If the system didn't register it, that's an error on their part. I offered to pay for it, but the manager insisted on calling you. The officer sighed, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Do you have your receipt? Amara reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt from the self-checkout. She handed it to him, and he scrutinized it carefully. There's no olive oil listed here, he said after a moment. Amara's jaw tightened. As I said, it must not have registered when I scanned it. I'm willing to pay for it now. Gerald interjected before the officer could respond. She had her chance to pay for it. Now it's a matter of policy. The officer glanced at his partner, a younger woman who seemed equally unimpressed with the situation. You're really pushing this? Yes, Gerald said firmly. The officers exchanged a look, and the younger one shrugged. All right, the stocky officer said. Ma'am, we're going to have to take you in for questioning. Amara's heart sank, but she nodded. I understand. As they led her out of the office in handcuffs, the whispers of the supermarket's staff and patrons followed her. She kept her head high, her face betraying none of the humiliation she felt. This wasn't the first time she'd faced judgment, and it wouldn't be the last. But it was the first time she'd been rendered powerless by it. The ride to the police station was surreal. The officers were professional but distant, their small talk limited to procedural matters. Amara sat silently, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her anymore. She thought about all the people who didn't have her resources, her privilege, or her voice. How often did they face situations like this? How often were they dismissed, judged, or punished for mistakes, or misunderstandings? By the time they arrived at the station, Amara had made a decision. She wasn't going to fight this for herself, she was going to fight it for everyone who couldn't. At the station, she was processed like any other detainee. The mugshot, the fingerprints, the cold, indifferent stares of the officers, it was a humbling experience, one that she wouldn't soon forget. As she sat in the holding cell, waiting for what came next, she thought about her life. The countless hours spent building her company, the sleepless nights spent strategizing ways to make a difference, the sacrifices she'd made for a better world, and now, here she was, reduced to a number in a system that didn't care who she was. But Amara wasn't one to dwell on setbacks. She was a problem solver, a visionary, and a fighter. And in that moment, she resolved to turn this experience into something meaningful. She didn't know how yet, but she knew she would. Hours later, her lawyer arrived, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Leah who had been on retainer for years. Leah's eyes widened when she saw Amara in the cell, but she quickly masked her shock. This is a misunderstanding, Leah said firmly to the officers as they escorted Amara out. We'll be filing a formal complaint. Amara didn't say a word until they were outside, the cool evening air a welcome relief after the stifling atmosphere of the station. Are you all right? Leah asked, concern etched on her face. Amara nodded. I'm fine. But this isn't over. Leah raised an eyebrow. You want to press charges? No, Amara said, a small smile forming on her lips. I want to change the system. Back in the comfort of her home, Amara sat in the quiet of her study, replaying the events of the day in her mind. The surreal sequence of being accused, humiliated, and detained felt like a vivid dream. Yet, the sharp ache of injustice was all too real. She glanced at the small bottle of olive oil on her desk. Leah had insisted on purchasing it before they left the station, almost as a symbolic victory. Amara chuckled bitterly. $11, she thought. That was all it took to unravel the facade of her anonymity. But this wasn't just about her. The wheels in her mind began to turn. She thought about the single mother in line behind her, the elderly man scrutinizing soup labels, the countless faces in the supermarket who had watched her public humiliation. How many of them might have experienced something similar? How many lacked the resources to fight back or the voice to be heard? She pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began to research. Within hours, Amara had uncovered a troubling reality. Incidents of individuals being wrongfully accused of petty theft were far more common than she had imagined. Worse, these accusations disproportionately targeted marginalized groups, people without the privilege of wealth or social standing. Lives were derailed over trivial misunderstandings, and systems designed to serve justice often perpetuated bias instead. Amara leaned back in her chair, her thoughts coalescing into a singular determination. She couldn't change what had happened to her, but she could use it as a catalyst for something greater. Her humiliation would not be wasted. The next morning, Amara convened a meeting with her core team, a group of trusted advisors who had been with her since the early days of her company. They gathered in her sprawling living room, a mix of lawyers, strategists, and communications experts. Leah was there, too, her sharp eyes scanning the room as Amara addressed them. "Yesterday, I experienced something that millions of people endure every day," Amara began, her voice steady but impassioned. "I was humiliated, dismissed, and judged, not for who I am, but for what someone assumed about me. And I realized something: this isn't just my problem. It's a systemic issue. And we're going to do something about it." Her team listened intently as she outlined her vision. The goal was ambitious but clear: to create an initiative that would address wrongful accusations, systemic bias, and the misuse of power in everyday interactions. They would call it Project Fairness, a comprehensive effort to educate, advocate, and reform. The initiative would have 3 primary pillars. The first was education, developing programs to train retail employees and security personnel in implicit bias and conflict resolution. The second was advocacy, creating a platform for individuals to share their stories, amplifying their voices, and shining a light on systemic injustices. The third was reform, partnering with lawmakers to draft legislation that would protect individuals from unjust detentions and ensure greater accountability for businesses and law enforcement. Amara's team was energized by her vision, and they immediately set to work. Leah began drafting a legal framework for the reform pillar, while the communications team brainstormed strategies to launch the initiative. Amara herself reached out to influential figures in her network, activists, policymakers, and fellow business leaders, securing their support for the project. Within weeks, Project Fairness was launched. The announcement was made through a heartfelt video that Amara recorded in her study. She spoke candidly about her experience, acknowledging her privilege, but emphasizing the universality of injustice. The video quickly went viral, resonating with millions of people around the world. Stories began pouring in, accounts of wrongful accusations, systemic bias, and everyday indignities that had long been ignored. As Project Fairness gained momentum, it began to attract media attention. Amara found herself thrust into the spotlight in a way she had always avoided. Reporters clamored for interviews, eager to hear her story and her vision for change. She obliged, not out of vanity but because she knew the power of visibility. If her voice could amplify the voices of others, then it was a price she was willing to pay. One particularly poignant interview took place on a popular talk show. The host, a charismatic man with a knack for drawing out emotional stories, asked Amara about the moment she decided to turn her humiliation into action. "It wasn't a single moment," Amara explained, her tone reflective. "It was a culmination of realizations. When I was sitting in that holding cell, I wasn't thinking about my wealth or my status. I was thinking about the people who face situations like that every day, without the safety net I have. I realized that my experience, as humiliating as it was, could be a bridge, a way to connect with others and bring about real change." The audience erupted into applause, and Amara felt a flicker of hope. This was only the beginning. As the months went on, Project Fairness achieved remarkable milestones. The education programs were adopted by several major retail chains, resulting in a significant decrease in wrongful detentions. The advocacy platform became a powerful tool for storytelling, with individuals sharing their experiences and finding solidarity in their shared struggles. And the reform efforts led to the passage of new legislation in multiple states, ensuring greater accountability for businesses and law enforcement. But the journey wasn't without challenges. Critics accused Amara of using her initiative as a publicity stunt, while others dismissed her efforts as overly idealistic. Some businesses resisted the education programs, citing costs and logistical concerns. And there were moments when Amara herself doubted whether her efforts would make a lasting impact. One such moment came during a heated meeting with a group of retail executives. Amara had presented a proposal for mandatory bias training, but the executives pushed back, citing budget constraints and skepticism about the program's effectiveness. "Ms. Cole," one executive said, his tone condescending, "with all due respect, you don't understand the realities of running a retail business. These programs sound nice in theory, but they're not practical." Amara met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "You're right," she said calmly. "I don't know what it's like to run a retail business. But I do know what it's like to be wrongfully accused. And I know that the cost of doing nothing is far greater than the cost of doing what's right." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, the executives began to nod. The program was eventually implemented, and the results spoke for themselves: increased employee satisfaction, improved customer relationships, and a marked reduction in complaints. As Project Fairness continued to grow, Amara found herself transformed. The experience that had once been a source of humiliation became a wellspring of purpose. She realized that her wealth and influence were not just tools for personal success, but instruments for collective good. 1 year to the day after her ordeal at the supermarket, Amara returned to the store, not as a shopper, but as a speaker. The store had since adopted Project Fairness's training programs, and Amara had been invited to address the staff. Standing in the same aisles where she had once been humiliated, Amara felt a profound sense of closure. She looked out at the faces of the employees, many of whom had watched her that day, and began to speak. "We all make mistakes," she said, her voice steady. "But what defines us is how we learn from them, how we grow, and how we choose to treat each other moving forward. This store, this community, has shown me that change is possible. And for that, I'm grateful." As she finished, the room erupted into applause. Amara smiled, a deep sense of fulfillment washing over her. This was her legacy, not the tech empire she had built or the wealth she had amassed, but the lives she had touched and the change she had inspired. And in that moment, she knew that her journey was far from over. Amara's life had taken on a new rhythm since the launch of Project Fairness. Her days were no longer consumed by board meetings and tech strategies, but by a mission that felt far more personal and transformative. Her initiative had blossomed into a full-fledged movement, and her team had grown exponentially to include legal experts, educators, data analysts, and community leaders. But with growth came complexity, and the challenges seemed to multiply with each passing day. It wasn't long before Project Fairness faced its first major backlash. A series of investigative reports from a prominent news outlet accused the initiative of vilifying businesses and fostering a culture of victimhood. The articles were rife with cherry-picked anecdotes and interviews from disgruntled store owners who claimed they were being unfairly targeted. The narrative was further amplified by pundits on social media, some of whom labeled Amara as out of touch and her project as an elitist agenda. Amara read the reports in silence, her face an unreadable mask. Leah, who sat across from her in the office, was less composed. "This is absolute nonsense," Leah said, slamming the printed articles onto the desk. "They're twisting everything we've worked for." Amara looked up, her calm demeanor betraying none of the frustration she felt. "That's how the game is played," she said softly. "When you challenge the status quo, it fights back." Leah crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "We need to respond. A formal statement, a press conference, something to counter this narrative." Amara nodded slowly, but didn't immediately agree. She was learning that sometimes the best way to counter criticism wasn't through direct confrontation, but through action. "We'll respond," she said finally, "but not with words. We'll let our work speak for itself." She leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Let's focus on the data. If we can demonstrate the measurable impact of our programs, we can discredit these claims without stooping to their level. The team set to work, compiling reports and case studies that highlighted the success of Project Fairness. They gathered testimonials from individuals whose lives had been transformed by the initiative: a young woman who had avoided jail time after being falsely accused of shoplifting, a small business owner who credited the training programs with improving employee morale, and a former security guard who spoke candidly about how the bias workshops had opened his eyes to his own prejudices. The findings were staggering. In the year since Project Fairness had launched, wrongful accusations in participating stores had decreased by 45%. Customer satisfaction ratings had increased by 30%, and employee turnover rates had dropped significantly. The data painted a clear picture: the initiative was making a tangible difference. Armed with this evidence, Amara and her team organized a public forum to present their findings. Held in a packed auditorium, the event drew business leaders, community advocates, journalists, and everyday citizens. Amara took the stage, her presence commanding but approachable. "Let me be clear," she began, her voice resonating through the hall. "Project Fairness isn't about assigning blame or fostering division. It's about creating solutions that benefit everyone, from the employees on the front lines to the customers they serve." She walked across the stage, gesturing to the screen behind her, which displayed graphs and charts illustrating the initiative's impact. "This isn't theory. This is real, measurable progress. And it's just the beginning." The audience erupted into applause, and for the first time in weeks, Amara felt a sense of vindication. But she knew the battle was far from over. The backlash had revealed cracks in the system that went beyond wrongful accusations. It was clear that deeper, more systemic changes were needed, changes that would require not just education and advocacy, but a fundamental shift in how society approached justice and accountability. In the months that followed, Amara pushed Project Fairness into new territory. She partnered with think tanks and academic institutions to conduct comprehensive studies on systemic bias. She worked with lawmakers to draft federal legislation that would standardize protocols for detentions and ensure greater transparency in retail and law enforcement practices. And she launched a nationwide public awareness campaign, leveraging her tech expertise to create interactive tools and resources that empowered individuals to know their rights. One of the most ambitious undertakings was the creation of a mobile app called FairCheck. Designed to be a one-stop resource for individuals facing wrongful accusations, the app provided real-time legal guidance, a directory of pro bono attorneys, and a feature that allowed users to document incidents with audio, video, and geolocation data. Within weeks of its launch, the app had been downloaded millions of times and was already making headlines for its role in holding institutions accountable. Amara's personal life, however, began to bear the strain of her relentless schedule. She had always been a private person, but the demands of Project Fairness left little room for anything else. Friends she hadn't seen in months reached out with concern, and even her closest confidants urged her to take a step back. "You're going to burn out," Leah warned during one late-night meeting. "You can't pour from an empty cup." Amara smiled faintly but shook her head. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is bigger than all of us." Still, the toll was undeniable. She often found herself working late into the night, her only companions the glow of her laptop and the ever-growing stack of papers on her desk. There were moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether her efforts would ever be enough. But every story, every success, every life changed, kept her going. One such moment came when she received a letter from a teenage boy named Marcus. He had been accused of stealing a pair of sneakers from a department store, but thanks to FairCheck and the advocacy of Project Fairness, he had been exonerated. In his letter, Marcus described how the experience had shaken him but also inspired him. He wrote about his dream of becoming a lawyer one day, so he could fight for others the way Amara had fought for him. Amara read the letter twice, her vision blurring with tears. It was a reminder of why she had started this journey, a reminder that even the smallest acts of justice could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she could never fully comprehend. As Project Fairness entered its second year, Amara began to think about the future. She knew the work would never truly be finished, but she also knew that the initiative needed to outgrow her. She began mentoring a new generation of leaders within the organization, ensuring that the mission would continue long after she stepped away. And step away she would, eventually. But not yet. For now, there was still too much to do, too many battles to fight, and too many lives to change. Late one evening, as she sat in her study with Marcus's letter in hand, Amara glanced at the bottle of olive oil that still sat on her desk. It had become a symbol of everything she had endured and everything she had achieved. What had once been a source of humiliation was now a testament to resilience, a reminder that even the smallest moments could spark the biggest movements. She smiled to herself, her resolve stronger than ever. This was her purpose. This was her legacy. And she was just getting started. Months turned into years as Project Fairness continued to expand its reach and deepen its impact. Amara had long since stopped counting the hours she spent working. Every waking moment seemed to bleed into the next, fueled by a relentless drive to make the world a more just and compassionate place. The movement had grown far beyond her initial vision, encompassing not only wrongful accusations but broader systemic issues that perpetuated inequality and injustice. Her efforts had drawn global attention. What began as a national initiative now had chapters in countries around the world. From urban centers in Europe to remote villages in Africa and Asia, Project Fairness had become a beacon of hope for countless individuals. Its three pillars, education, advocacy, and reform, were being adapted to fit the unique cultural and societal contexts of each region. Yet, for all its successes, Amara knew the fight was far from over. It was during this time that Amara faced one of the most defining moments of her journey. A high-profile case had emerged in a major metropolitan city, involving a young man named Caleb. Caleb had been accused of shoplifting an expensive watch from a luxury department store. The case had made headlines not only because of the item's value but because of the brutal way Caleb had been treated. Security footage showed him being tackled to the ground, handcuffed, and publicly shamed, all while he insisted on his innocence. Amara was deeply moved by Caleb's story. He reminded her of Marcus, the teenager who had written her a heartfelt letter years ago. But Caleb's case was different. This wasn't a misunderstanding over a bottle of olive oil or a pair of sneakers. This was a deliberate act of profiling, carried out in full view of the public. And the consequences had been devastating. Caleb had lost his job, his reputation was in shambles, and his mental health had suffered immensely. Amara decided to take a personal role in the case. She reached out to Caleb's family, offering Project Fairness's full support. Caleb's mother, a resilient woman named Patrice, welcomed Amara into their modest home. Patrice's eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion as she recounted the toll the ordeal had taken on her son. "He's a good boy," Patrice said, her voice trembling. "He's never been in trouble a day in his life." But they didn't see that. They didn't see him. They saw a threat. Amara listened intently, her heart breaking for the family. She promised Patrice that Caleb's story would not go unheard. Over the next few weeks, Amara and her team worked tirelessly to gather evidence, secure legal representation, and craft a narrative that would counter the public perception of Caleb as a criminal. The trial was a media circus. News outlets lined the courthouse steps, eager to capture every moment. Amara attended every session, sitting quietly in the back, her presence a silent show of solidarity. Caleb's defense team, funded by Project Fairness, presented a compelling case. They highlighted the security footage, which showed Caleb placing the watch back on the counter after examining it. They called witnesses who attested to his character and honesty. And they exposed the department store's history of profiling customers based on race and appearance. The turning point came when Caleb himself took the stand. He spoke with a quiet strength, recounting the humiliation and fear he had felt that day. "I wasn't treated like a person," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was treated like a criminal before anyone even asked me a question." By the time the trial concluded, the courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. When the verdict was announced, "Not guilty," there was an audible gasp, followed by an eruption of applause. Caleb's family embraced him, tears streaming down their faces. Amara felt a wave of relief, but also a renewed sense of urgency. This victory was significant, but it was just one battle in a much larger war. In the aftermath of the trial, Amara used the momentum to push for broader reforms. She met with lawmakers, urging them to pass legislation that would hold businesses accountable for discriminatory practices. She spoke at conferences and universities, using Caleb's story as a powerful example of why systemic change was necessary. And she continued to grow Project Fairness, ensuring it had the resources to take on cases like Caleb's in the future. But while the public celebrated Amara's successes, her personal life remained a quiet struggle. The demands of her work had left little time for relationships or self-care. She often found herself awake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced with thoughts of what still needed to be done. Her friends and colleagues urged her to take a break, to step back and recharge, but Amara couldn't bring herself to do it. The work felt too urgent, too important. One evening, as she sat alone in her study, she received an unexpected call from Marcus, the teenager who had written her that letter years ago. Now a young man, Marcus had just graduated from law school and was preparing to take the bar exam. He wanted to thank Amara for inspiring him and to share his plans to join Project Fairness as a legal advocate. "I wouldn't be here without you," Marcus said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You gave me hope when I didn't think I had any." Amara felt a lump rise in her throat. "You did this," she said softly. "You fought for your future. I just gave you a little push." After the call, Amara sat in silence, her emotions swirling. Marcus's journey was a testament to the ripple effect of change. It reminded her that even the smallest acts of fairness could inspire others to carry the torch. Over the next few months, Amara began to focus more on the future of Project Fairness. She worked closely with her leadership team to identify individuals who could carry the movement forward. She mentored Marcus and other young leaders, sharing her insights and experiences while encouraging them to find their own paths. Finally, after years of relentless dedication, Amara made the difficult decision to step back from her day-to-day role in the organization. In a heartfelt speech delivered at the annual Project Fairness Summit, she announced her transition to a more advisory role. "This movement was never about me," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "It's about all of us. It's about the belief that fairness is not just an ideal, but a right. And it's about the next generation, who will carry this work forward with courage and conviction." The audience gave her a standing ovation, their applause echoing through the hall. Amara felt a profound sense of closure, but also a deep sense of pride. She had built something that would outlast her, something that would continue to change lives long after she was gone. In the years that followed, Amara watched from the sidelines as Project Fairness grew into a global powerhouse for justice. She spent her time traveling, writing, and mentoring young leaders. And while her days were quieter, her impact was as loud as ever. One day, as she sat on the porch of her countryside home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she thought about that day in the supermarket. The bottle of olive oil, now empty but preserved on a shelf in her study, had been the catalyst for a journey she could never have imagined. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had become a lifelong mission, a testament to the power of turning pain into purpose. Amara smiled to herself, her heart filled with gratitude. She had found her legacy, not in wealth or accolades, but in the lives she had touched and the change she had inspired. And she knew, deep in her soul, that the work would go on.